What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto Was Dark King Rayleigh's Reincarnation. If you haven't seen the first part of this series, I'll leave it up below on one of the cards so you guys can check that out. With that all out of the way, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Following the last part's ending, we essentially jump into a situation that would go something like this. Kakashi and Zabuza's fight ends up pretty much being just like it does in the original, and what ends up happening with Naruto and Sasuke is they simply watch on as their sensei essentially gets trapped in the water prison jutsu. After Kakashi gets caught up in this, he begins to essentially tell the team to please run away, telling them that they can't die. He will sacrifice himself and they can go. Immediately following this, Sakura would have fear in her eyes, and she begins to actually question whether she should go or not. But Naruto and Sasuke, both firm on their beliefs of not leaving their sensei behind after being told the wise words by Kakashi, would inevitably end up deciding that they want to actually fight against, well, Zabuza. And before I continue on with the story, in case you guys notice a little bit of a difference in my voice, it's just because, I don't know, I feel a little sick, I guess. I'm not sure. But, basically what ends up essentially going down, or maybe it might be that I just woke up, I'm not sure, but it's pretty hard to do my YouTube voice when I'm sick, you know what I mean? Nah, but yeah, basically Naruto and Sasuke both end up creating the same plan that they would have in canon. Naruto ends up being thrown like a shuriken, and then there's a shuriken behind the shuriken that causes Zabuza to have to let go of the hand. Naruto, not knowing about water walking, ends up not exactly being a big help in this situation, and the Zabuza versus Kakashi fight ends up going down just like it would in canon. Zabuza and Haku both end up making their way out of that situation, and inevitably Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi with the bridge builder would end up making their way towards Tazuna's house to simply just relax for a couple of days while Kakashi recuperates his loss of chakra. They go on to do so, and in the first day of arriving there, once they're getting ready to have dinner and such, the first person that Naruto would end up meeting would be Tsunami, Tazuna's daughter. Following this, he would go on to meet a boy by the name of Inari, who jumps into the kitchen and immediately begins disrespecting Team 7, telling them all that they are all going to die. After hearing these words, Naruto would stand up from the table as he would look at the boy and ask him how old he is. The boy says, "What do you care?" And from here, Naruto goes on to tell him, "From what it looks like to me, it looks like you, from my deduction, are about 10 years old, if not 7. You're like 7 to 8 years old, right? You lost somebody special to you, and now you're a whiny little brat. Let me go on and tell you something, kid. The world doesn't revolve around you. The world will throw things at you left and right, and you'll never be ready for it. It's going to beat you down to a pulp, and some people have it worse than others. They do. Some people grow up without parents. Some people grow up without family. Some people don't grow up at all. Kid, you're lucky to even be alive right now. I know some kids who would have died on certain occasions, and other kids that had a worse childhood than you. I'm one of those kids that had a hard life just like you, but I didn't choose to start crying and be in my sorrows about it. I chose to do something." Inari, after hearing these words from Naruto, would begin trying to run away, but Naruto would grab him by the arm and look at him deep in his eyes with a stare that could only convey determination. Tell him, take a good look at yourself in the mirror before you ever talk down onto somebody else for doing the thing that you should have done a long time ago. If you would have been training ever since that day, maybe you would be strong enough to stop them yourself. Inari goes on to leave the area crying, and everybody just sits there in silence while Naruto goes on to sit back down and enjoy his food. Following this little situation, Tsunami and Tazuna would apologize for Inari's actions, and Naruto would look at them before telling them that he needs to be toughened up. The real world doesn't work the way he sees it. He then looks at Tazuna and says, "And you should know this better than anyone else. If you raise that boy the same way you've been doing it, you're dooming him for failure. Somewhere along the lines, he's gonna meet an obstacle that he won't be able to overcome by himself, and he will fail." Tazuna and Tsunami hearing this would both kind of understand what Naruto's getting at, and following this little situation, everybody just kind of goes on to have a little bit of an awkward lunchtime or meal. Eventually, after about a week, Kakashi ends up waking up from his chakra depletion, and once he does so, he ends up teaching the team about tree walking and also teaching them a little bit of taijutsu and all that stuff for the team to actually practice by themselves. They go on to do so for a little bit of time, and eventually what ends up going down following this is basically everybody learns their tree walking abilities. Naruto and Sasuke, still just like in the original, would have struggled just because Naruto being Rayleigh's reincarnation isn't gonna fix his chakra control magically. It just doesn't work like that. It might make him be incredibly talented at hockey, but not chakra. That said though, eventually the day would come when everybody kind of ends up making their way towards the bridge, right? Everybody's at the bridge, they're doing their thing, including Naruto, mind you. And what essentially ends up happening is Inari and Tsunami are back at the house by themselves when the bandits end up arriving, and this time around, Inari's not having it. When he sees his mother get taken away, Inari pretty much, thinking back to the words that Naruto says, would think, I have to do something about it. And so he ends up leaving the house, leaving his mother to just be with the guys by themselves, and inevitably rushing over towards the villagers to ask for help. A huge mob of them arrive and they end up beating the bandits senseless. While currently Naruto, Sasuke, and the rest of the team are pretty much just at the bridge awaiting for Zabuza to eventually arrive. He would arrive in about 10 minutes when the area would get very, very foggy, and as soon as it begins getting like that, Kakashi would end up using a jutsu which would dispel the fog immediately, making it so that the fog is not half as thick as it would have been in the original, courtesy of Naruto asking if he has anything like that. Kakashi, after doing so, would then engage in a battle against Zabuza using his Sharingan off rip, as Sasuke and both Naruto would end up engaging in a battle against Haku. Now, this time around, Haku isn't only fighting against Sasuke, who's like kinda semi-holding back, but no, this time around he's fighting against Naruto and Sasuke, who are both trying their best to actively defeat, Haku. What ends up essentially going down after a while of them going back and forth with their chakra clashes and taijutsu battle and all, what ends up essentially going down is basically after a while Haku gets tired of this and eventually ends up slamming his hand onto the ground, screaming, "Ice Crystal Mirror! Demonic Jutsu!" As from here, a bunch of mirrors would end up arriving, and since Naruto didn't meet Haku this time around, as soon as this happens, they both begin trying their best to dodge, but inevitably a bunch of Senbon needles would end up piercing through their skins due to the fact that Sasuke can't exactly track them, and Naruto was getting hit with so many at the same time that his observation haki, while very developed, is not exactly high enough that he can just dodge everything immediately. This would actually serve as a period of breaking through his limits for Naruto. As Sasuke ends up pretty much unlocking a Sharingan to be able to dodge this, Naruto would end up pretty much developing his observation haki to the next level through combat itself, going on to eventually begin dodging the Senbon from Haku, which would lead Haku to finally say, "Fine, then I guess I should step it up," as Haku goes on to throw tons of Senbon towards the direction of Sasuke, and Sasuke wouldn't be able to dodge. They're way too fast for even a Sharingan to track, and what ends up happening is Naruto jumps in the way, and using his armament haki would harden his skin so that he was able to pretty much repel the Senbon off of his body. A ton of them would end up piercing Sasuke, and this would lead to Sasuke appearing dead. And after this happens, Naruto inevitably falls into a state of bloodlusted and Nine Tails rage mode, which would lead Naruto to inevitably pretty much end up snapping Haku like a twig before Haku gets the opportunity to actually defeat, or not defeat anybody, but more or less sacrifice his life for Zabuza. Following this, you could just hear a Chidori in the background as Kakashi would scream, "Chidori!" And from here, Zabuza's heart would be pierced as simultaneously Haku's head would be caved in by a punch from Naruto, using armament haki in hand with the chakra that he's currently letting out. So they would have essentially decimated Zabuza's squad, and about 10 minutes, or no, a couple minutes following this, Zabuza's boss, Gato ends up arriving and pretty much saying that he wasn't going to pay him anyways. With Zabuza and Haku both dead, this leaves only Team 7 to handle it. But seeing as Naruto was still in a rage mode, he goes on to absolutely decimate everybody in a way that Zabuza would have done so, going on to essentially destroy Gato in one of the most gruesome ways possible and get his first 25 kills, which is pretty insane to think about seeing as he's just a kid. Actually, no, not even 25, more like 36 kills, right? And he then snaps out of it after all the rest of Gato's men end up running away with their tails between their legs, sorry. But after this, he ends up pretty much going into unconsciousness and waking up back in the village in his room. He then goes on to ask what happened, and Kakashi would go on to explain that, nothing, Naruto. Nothing happened. You passed out after chakra exertion. And Naruto then has these visions of Haku and how he brutally defeated him. Naruto would think to himself, I can't believe I did that. And Kakashi would tell him that it was in the heat of the moment. He can't judge himself harshly for that. In a ninja world, it has to be. Naruto would finish his sentence. Done. Yeah, I know. I won't fret on this too long, Kakashi. Just let me know when the next mission is, and I'd like to be left alone. From here, Kakashi leaves the room, and Naruto and Team 7 never ends up encountering the Suna squad as early as they would have before. So essentially, they end up inevitably being told by Kakashi about the events of the Chunin exams. They end up all agreeing to take part in said event, and from here, they end up going towards the Chunin exams tower on said day. When they all end up pretty much arriving, they end up encountering a boy with bushy eyebrows and a bowl haircut. He ends up challenging Sasuke, asking him to battle him, seeing as he is the last Uchiha. And Sasuke ends up, accepting. His ego is so big and he wants to stroke his ego a little bit. So, he wants to defeat this bushy-haired brow kid. So he ends up engaging in battle with Rayliegh, only to be utterly defeated by him and have his hopes just completely crushed and drained. The dude... it was not a good time for Sasuke, to say the least. Pretty much what happens in the original goes on to happen, and eventually Team 7 would end up finding themselves in the exam area, only for Kabuto to come in and bother them, telling them about how he has information on everybody. This goes on to happen for a little bit longer, and then what ends up happening following this is basically everybody goes on to take the written test. Now, this would go just like many of you guys are probably expecting. Nothing really goes down, and eventually we cut to the situation when they're all finding themselves in the Forest of Death. The team would be running across tree to tree when suddenly Naruto, using his observation haki and sensory abilities, would actually be able to detect a large amount of killing intent rushing towards them at incredible speeds. As soon as Naruto notices this, he would look back to Sasuke and Sakura and tell them to not be afraid because something is coming their way. Suddenly, a man on top of a snake would end up appearing right before him as he goes on to attack Naruto, who would simply jump up into the air, grab his sword, and slice the head of the snake off, promptly before turning to the direction of Sasuke, who's frozen in fear in front of Orochimaru. He goes on to stab himself to let his body move, and following this, he then goes on to try to hide from Orochimaru. Naruto at this moment would see Orochimaru begin pretty much going after Sasuke, but Naruto appears before Orochimaru and tells him, "Your battle's with me." He then goes on to use armament haki on his fists as he then rushes towards the direction of Orochimaru with his blade on his back, and then begins to throw a haymaker blow at Orochimaru's direction, which causes Orochimaru to actually have to jump back a bit in order to dodge it. Suddenly though, Orochimaru then begins to pretty much unveil his incredible taijutsu prowess and goes on to eventually proceed to essentially dismantle Naruto in a lot of ways and shapes and forms. Eventually, after defeating Naruto more and more, Naruto would begin to realize that if he doesn't win this battle, it's Sasuke's life which will be lost, as well as his own. So Naruto, after this, in a moment of desperation, would actually end up activating Conqueror's Haki. Being backed up into a corner by Orochimaru, Naruto would unleash a large amount of Conqueror's Haki, which would actually stun Orochimaru into pretty much not being able to move. I mean, his will is high enough to the point where he doesn't pass out, but Orochimaru is just shocked. And Naruto's eyes would actually grow slit-like as he looks towards the direction of Orochimaru and says, "You are not touching Sasuke!" He comes rushing in with his blade and he ends up actually cutting off the head of Orochimaru in one fell swoop, as he ends up appearing behind him in anime swordsman style, and Sasuke watched the whole thing go down as he was helpless to do a thing about it. Orochimaru didn't have the chance to place the curse mark on Sasuke's neck, and he dies, quote unquote, in the forest of death. But not really, because if you really think about it, he's Orochimaru, and he's never really gonna die. Like, he never dies. It doesn't. I don't think even like Kage Naruto could kill Orochimaru. The man comes back to life every 10 minutes, so can't exactly kill the dude off. That said, though, what does actually end up happening, however, is basically Naruto would go on to pretty much like fall down to one knee due to chakra absorption, and Sasuke and Sakura are actually tasked with having to actually hold on to Naruto and take him towards the direction of the area where the bell test will be, where the Chunin exams actually take place in, right? Halfway along the way, they end up encountering the Sound Genin, and when they do encounter them, Naruto has to get up from his rest. He gets up weakly and ends up pretty much telling Sasuke that they'll handle it. Sakura goes on to pretty much be like, "No, Naruto, Sasuke, I can help," but they both look at her and tell her to stay out of it. Following this, they go on to essentially engage in a battle with the Sound Genin, and what ends up pretty much happening is Naruto has to once again let out the power of the Kyuubi, just because his base power alone being drained just wasn't enough. So with the power of the Kyuubi, after Sasuke got his butt handed to him, Naruto was able to actually defeat the Sound Genin, and Sasuke once again, watched this, he was helpless to do anything while Naruto saved them yet again. That was 2 times in one day. He gets pretty angry, and they all end up going back towards the tower, only to meet Iruka Sensei and Kakashi, and following this little situation, they eventually end up having about 1 day to rest, so Naruto's chakra levels would heal back up, and Naruto would end up feeling good and rested. The very next day, it's unveiled to them that they're going to be having to take place in preliminaries, and Naruto's battle against Kiba ends up going down like many of you guys would expect. Easy. Naruto would eventually end up making his way towards the stadium. Kiba, seeing that his opponent is Naruto, would have a smug look on his face and begin to think to himself that this is going to be easy. He looks to Akamaru and says, "Akamaru!" Akamaru barks at him and then begins to essentially do his man-beast transformation. And Naruto would simply think to himself that Kiba hasn't matured a bit since they started. What ends up happening after this is Kiba screams, "Fang over Fang!" as both of them end up pretty much combining with each other and rushing at Naruto. But Naruto, holding one arm out with armament haki and chakra in boot to actually, give his arm more strength, is able to actually hold them back with one arm only. As he then grabs both Akamaru and Kiba by the heads, and he just throws them away in opposite directions. Naruto immediately begins running towards their direction and saying, what's it called? Not multi-shadow clone, but shadow clone jutsu! As he creates a shadow clone, and it begins rushing towards the direction of Akamaru, as Naruto rushes in at Kiba and then kicks him up into the air one good time before then going on to combo him and knocking Kiba out promptly, leaving Kiba to be taken away in a stretcher, while Naruto was offered some ointment via Hinata, who had a massive crush on him, not only because he saved her as a little girl, but because Naruto was stunningly good looking. That said, though, what ends up essentially happening following this little situation is all the rest of the battles happen like they would in canon. And yes, I mean all of them. Except for Sasuke, who just has an easier time against his opponent since he doesn't have the curse mark, but that is what that is. And following this little situation, what ends up basically going down is everybody goes on their 1-month training arc, right? Naruto ends up meeting Jiraiya during this time and actually ends up learning the summoning jutsu, as well as a little bit more control over the Kyuubi and way better skills when it comes to his taijutsu prowess, which is something that Jiraiya would be heavily impressed by Naruto's already high skills in taijutsu, which was extremely impressive to Jiraiya because, he's never seen anything like this since Orochimaru. Orochimaru was one of those few people who had just this unforeseen talent that was just too great to ignore. But Naruto, it was as if it was second nature. It was incredible. This boy was gonna be something someday. Naruto would also work on his haki, such as observation and armament haki, in order to essentially grow his rate of usage with it, gain more power, gain more conqueror's haki, just all in all become a better opponent for other people, a stronger man. he ends up actually refining his swordsman skills, and by the time that he ends up going back for his battle against Neji, after the 1 month period would be over, it essentially turns out to be a one-sided squash. I mean, obviously we know Neji is a close range fighter, and Naruto doesn't exactly have a ton of jutsus for long range. So what does Naruto have to do? He has to get up close and personal. And you know what Naruto would say to Neji? He would say, you know, Neji, if we would have fought and you didn't do what you did to Hinata, this wouldn't have been as personal as it is. He takes out his blade and it's actually revealed to be a katana this time, as Naruto holds it with a backwards grip, and he then says, well, this is it for you, Neji. He holds out a hand sign, and then he immediately then proceeds to say, he proceeds to use like a wind bullet jutsu to shoot it at Neji, as Neji is basically able to just simply jump out of the way and then look up as he sees Naruto before him instantly, who then goes on to essentially slash Neji right across the chest faster than Neji could have reacted. Keep in mind, Neji is one of the fastest genin in the series, and it took a ton of jonin to even stop him from attacking Hinata. So Naruto being able to attack Neji and press him the way that he just did is impressive in every way, shape, and form. So Naruto, after landing this slash on a Neji's chest, would kick him away right on same said chest, and Neji would go tumbling down onto the ground, rolling around in dirt as he begins to essentially get up weakly. And Naruto then asks Neji if he still feels so high and mighty, before Neji goes on to tell him that he knows nothing, that he will still lose, that was just a major setback. And Naruto says, are you now? Before finally revealing that there was a clone behind him. Neji dodges weakly and is able to dodge because of his Byakugan, but Naruto would then go on to rush once more, and without even using his sword, but literally just coming in and like pimp slapping Neji, pretty much hits him with armament hockey, sending him crashing into the wall, as Neji gets completely just knocked out and Naruto is declared the winner.